If you would like to support the Guy Jeans podcast, please write a review on iTunes or Google Reviews and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. If you have questions, suggestions, advertising inquiries, or would like to be a guest on the podcast, please email us at guyjeanspodcast@gmail.com.
It's a Guy Jeans podcast.
Hi, you guys. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Guy Jeans. Today's guest, Paul Bourq, Fly Fishing Team USA member. He works for Black Riffle Coffee Company. He was the youth fly fishing team coach. He was a guide, is a guide still, but he also is a police officer part-time. And he has a company called Drift Media as well. So I'm excited to talk to him all about everything that he does. And without further ado, here is Paul. Paul, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you, sir?
I'm doing really good. We got a lot to talk to you about. I just read an article about you entitled "The Most Interesting Sportsman in the World." And after reading that, man, I'm like, wow, this guy is interesting, man. All the different things that you've done and are doing. So for those who don't know, who is Paul Bourq?
Oh man, that's a tough one. So at the end of the day, I guess at heart, I'm just a fishing nerd, really. I mean, I love to chase them, love to catch them, love to try to figure them out. I guess second, I feel like I'm kind of a camera guy. Like I don't hold a camera too much anymore, but I spent a lot of my life shooting photos and shooting videos and trying to kind of document the things I was seeing, like incredible things, incredible fisheries. And those days that we have, they only happen that way once. And
nice
days never happen again. So, I wanted to share those things and provide those experiences to people. And hopefully it took as much away from them as I did. Some did, some didn't, but yeah, we do our part. I know you know that game very well yourself.
Yeah. So growing up in North Carolina and fishing around there, I've got some questions about North Carolina in that zone too that I wanted to ask you about. But the story that I read about, it sounds like you got into fly fishing and really quickly got pretty good at it. And in fact, getting on the North Carolina fly fishing team and then eventually getting on Fly Fishing Team USA. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. Growing up, I grew up in the mountains of North Carolina, and I had a small creek, very, very small creek. But to me, that was my world. That was my, Atlantic Ocean. That's all I had. So I learned the nuances of that tiny creek, and that thing is, you can jump across it in most places, but I knew every inch of it, every millimeter of it. And, as a kid, I was just fishing nerd, and I would kind of try to figure out where they lived, what they ate, spinners, the effect of, bait fishing, whatever. I remember leaving, wet pieces of rug out in the garden so I'd have worms underneath it to go bait fishing. And I realized I started just building principles of why fish eat. What are they doing and why? How do different things affect them? High water, low water, clear, dirty. Where do they sit? So on and so forth. And, where I live is super diverse. So we've got everything from literally 6,000 foot mountains all the way to rivers and lakes. And, as time kind of went on, it gave me all the opportunity I needed, with the exception of saltwater, to catch bass and, bluegill and trout and catfish and all kinds of things. So I didn't ever really consider myself a trout guy, quote unquote. I just loved fishing, and we have a lot of trout. So by default, I was a trout fisherman. We have 6,000 or 7,000 miles of streams within an hour of where I live, more than you can see in a lifetime, for sure.
Wow, that's awesome. And so you just kind of got into that, and then kind of progressed into fly fishing, and then got on the team, the North Carolina team.
I did, yeah. So I had always wanted to fly fish because it seemed interesting to me, and I didn't actually start. A lot of people don't know this, but I didn't start really fly fishing till I was 18. I was in college. We had to take a PE class, and it was either fly fishing or basketball or something. So I took fly fishing.
Absolutely.
That was awesome. It was awesome.
Yeah, that's way cool.
Yeah, I got credit for it too, which is incredible.
Oh, that's awesome.
I remember going out to the river, a local delayed harvest here called the Tuckasegee, and I remember, learning kind of the game. I bought a rod wherever Cabela's or one of the kits, the standard kits that are out there.
Uh-huh.
And I remember a quick little story. I was going out one weekend. I had my license by then, so I really kind of had the world. I could go wherever I wanted. And I saw this guy catching these fish on the river. And I went up to him and said, which I didn't realize that this wasn't really a thing. It's certainly not in bass fishing. You don't just go ask people randomly, especially strangers, what they're catching fish on and how and where, annoying 17 or 18-year-old with 21 questions. But I went up there anyway. And I remember he was kind of rude. He's like, yeah, you're just going to have to put your time in, son. But, well, dang, I am putting my time in. That's why I'm out here. I'm trying. He's like, you're just going to have to figure it out. I said, well, so I'm working on. So I'm talking to you. It was kind of rude. And I said, and he was fishing backstory. I don't know. I remember this, but it was a size 14 elk hair caddis. And I remember thinking, that's the secret. That's the fly, which you and I both know it's not. But I remember that fly, and I remember telling myself right then, I said, if I ever get good enough at this thing, fly fishing and fishing in general, to be able to teach somebody something, I will never not give them the knowledge, no matter what, even if it's in a tournament. Like, I will never make anyone feel the way that guy made me feel. Like,
Nice.
I was out there hustling as hard as I could to get all the knowledge I could, and I didn't have anyone to show me anything. And I was reading, this is 2004 or 5. I mean, the YouTube wasn't like it is now. I don't think it even existed hardly. So I was reading everything I could, and reading all the classics, all the books all fly fishermen read. But at the end of the day, you just got to get out there and figure out. You can't fish another man's game. So I was trying to learn my own game,
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know it at the time, but that thing would kind of put a bug in me to ultimately lead me to, towards the North Carolina fly fishing team and guiding and the casting stuff, which I'm sure we'll talk about. Yeah.
When did you try out for the U.S. team?
The first time I tried to make it was in 2000 and, oh gosh, I have to go back and look. 9, 10, 11, somewhere in there. There was the nationals. I'd gotten on the North Carolina fly fishing team, and I'd met a couple of my mentors at the time, Josh Stevens, Chris Lee, so on and so forth. And they had a tremendous team. Like, competitive fly fishing was absolutely exploding.
Yeah.
There's like 30 guys. There was tournaments every weekend. There was regional teams all across North Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee. And we were competing against each other. And we didn't know it at the time, but we were getting way, way good at it. And just like anything, we were sharing all the knowledge, so on and so forth. So we put in for a national championships, the Team USA one, to come to Cherokee, North Carolina, which got accepted. We ran the tournament. Funny side note, I actually filmed that tournament. There's a DVD of it, and it was one of the first things I ever filmed in my life. But I don't know. I'm not afraid to take a little risk. So I said, I'm going to fish this tournament, and I'm going to film it because I want to document this thing. It's going to be awesome. I know it's going to be special. So I tried to qualify that year and didn't make it. It was doing pretty good. I needed to catch a fish in the final day on the lake, and did not even get a bite. So if I would have caught a fish on that lake, I would have made the team. But it is what it is. Like,
yeah,
everyone, it happens. It's the thing about fishing competition, similar to golf, is you lose a lot. Like, it's not in basketball. I mean, roughly you got a 50-50 shot, skill aside. In a fly fishing tournament or a bass fishing tournament, there's 200 guys or 100 guys or whatever it is. You lose a lot. And,
mm-hmm.
I never got into it for any sort of like pride or ego thing. I just wanted to know if I was improving.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I had to know, and there was no way for me to know with nobody coming up by myself. Like, how do you know if you're getting better? If I catch 50, that might be good, but what if you catch 100? That means I'm missing something. So for me, it was kind of a litmus test of success and making sure I was improving every day.
It's interesting. The reason why I was asking the date was, I believe it was 2006. They had the regional trials here in California on a river called the Kings River. And And I went to that and qualified and went to the nationals in Colorado.
Yep.
And you're right. The thing about it for me too was, you're put around all these amazing fly anglers from all over the US, and, most of them are actually really cool, and everybody's sharing knowledge, and it made me better. It made me look at the stream differently. It made me, analyze things completely different. It made me a better guide, just to, approach the stream differently with my clients and stuff like that. So yeah, you're right, man. Just getting more knowledge from that whole experience is pretty cool. I did go to, the Pennsylvania Nationals as well. Were you there? That one?
The one George Daniels one?
Yeah.
Nope. I was around the scene at that time, but I was not on the team yet. I actually made the team, I forgot the year, like the next year, 13 or something, in Bend, Oregon. So I did not make it to North Carolina and came back the next year with a lot of lakes and actually worked on my lake game really hard. And we don't have a ton of trout here, but I caught anything swimming, brim, trout, bass, whatever I could, and kind of dialed in the process. And, fish kind of do the same things for the same reasons. So was able to make the team in Oregon. Nice,
man. I fished, you said Josh Stevens, and I was on a boat with him a couple times, in the Stillwater. He's a cool dude, man.
Oh, he's awesome. Yeah, he was one of our local guy that had made the team and been to New Zealand and Scotland. And he was kind of inside line to, Lauren Williams and Pete and Anthony Narana and Lance Egan and all the kind of OG Team USA guys, all guys that, I look up to, still do to this day. And he knew all those guys. He knew Walt Ungerman and kind of all the OGs of the scene. And back then, you got to think, you know this, you were there in the early days too. Like it wasn't cool. Like it wasn't a thing. It wasn't a thing like it is now. Like nobody knew anything. It was kind of the Wild West. And exactly. I'd say honestly, it probably wasn't even that refined. Like body worms are still real heavy. Like there was not a really good understanding of, the techniques. It was kind of rudimentary at the time, but it certainly got better quickly. That's for sure. I mean, people really got dialed up quick on the techniques.
So how did you learn the techniques from the guys on the team, or did you kind of study it watching everybody, or how did you learn?
I did. Yeah. So I remember my first practice, I was with the guy that was running the North Carolina team, Eugene Schuler. He was a local.
I remember Eugene.
Yeah. Really good caster, right? Yeah. Like super good caster. And that's a whole nother story. Like I was not a great caster because I grew up on that small creek, right? I didn't know. I mean, honestly, I didn't know you had to cast further than like 20 feet to catch a trout because, I didn't know any different. But Eugene was showing us check nymphing, and back then it was like a 6 or 8 foot leader, 3 nymphs, like rolled nymphs, Napak hooks, like super short casts, and we were just kind of dragging. I remember thinking like, it's okay, but it doesn't feel like I was a nerd, right? So I remember I was like, even back as a kid, I was playing with like inflators with worms to like make the bait more natural and drift better, and I would get more bites. And it just seemed counterintuitive to me to have such heavy flies. But I'm a student, so I didn't say anything. I just kind of took it all in. But that was my first experience with that. And then I started kind of dialing up my own style. Like I started fishing a lot of smaller flies and lighter stuff and going to real light tippets, 7X and so on and so forth really early on, like 8 years ago. A lot of single fly stuff. And, over time you go to a few tournaments. When you have, in our region, we had 20 to 30 guys a weekend practicing. That's 20 or 30 guys trying different things. We come to the table at the end of the tournament. We all kind of do an AAR debrief about what's working and what's not. Like our team got really good really quickly. And we had Josh with that international experience. Chris Lee ended up making Team USA in Cherokee, the North Carolina Nationals. I did not. So we had a really good group of anglers that were all talking to each other and competing regularly. So the learning curve went up, our abilities went up more than exponentially, like almost straight up at the time.
It's cool. You guys would all get together and talk about the techniques and stuff. I mean, that's what makes a team, right? It was kind of the foundations of, I didn't know it at the time that I was ultimately going to get asked to coach the U.S. youth team.
But I knew that, what I was not proud of was the fact that Team USA collectively had been getting our butts kicked overseas by the French and the
Yeah.
Polish, certainly, and the Czechs. And, I knew, Courier had won, a bronze on the dry fly in the lake. And there was Norman Moctema had won a silver. I think silver, maybe gold. Sorry, Norm, if you're listening. But Norm had done really well at a youth level, but Team USA had never won a team medal. And I thought, man, I've seen these guys fish. Like, I've seen Pete Erickson fish. I've seen these guys fish, and they are tremendous. Like, they are no joke, like the best I'd ever seen. Like, why are we not winning? And that would kind of ultimately lead to, what was the foundations of our success, which I'm sure we'll get into eventually. But with the youth team, which was this kind of team medal mentality, like our sole focus was to win the team gold, because then we knew if we all worked together with that mission that the individual successes would follow. I think that was, possibly what plagued some of the early days of Team USA. Was there was a lot of kind of individualistic stuff there, and that it's hard. Like, it's hard to have a team and an individual element, and we found a lot of success by focusing on that team medal, and there's some cool stories there down the road to get into.
It makes sense, just to be able to share everything, like what worked for you, man, on that beat, what didn't, what do you think those guys were using? All that kind of stuff comes into play for sure.
Without a doubt. Yeah, correct.
So let's go into the youth fly fishing team. I mean, how cool was that to be able to, you guys actually did win the gold, didn't you?
Yeah, we ended up winning, I don't want to misquote it, but 3 or 4 world championships gold. We won a number of individual gold, individual bronze and silver as well. Like, we had a really dominant streak the 4 years or so I spent there. That was, I started in France. We did Ireland, Poland, United States. Like, we were all over the place. And, that first team I got was an incredible group of young guys. And, I had Robbie Worth and, Noah Thompson and Aston Boone and all these guys. They were awesome anglers. And we went to France. I got the team, kind of last minute, like a couple weeks before France, but I started implementing what I thought was, success. And it was this team medal mentality and some other things, technically, like the way we broke down water, which we can get into. But we did some things that were unique, and I didn't know if they were going to work, but I had absolute trust in their ability. And to quote Josh Stevens, one thing he told me, he said, "You can never fish another man's game," which basically means, like, take the knowledge, but fish your way. Like, if you're a whatever, fill in the blank, if you're a single fly guy and you like 7X in a single fly, then you do that. But, just take the knowledge you have. Don't try to fish another man's game. Fish your way. So I kind of encouraged those guys to fish their way, and I started building some kind of tenets that we would use, and we were successful. We ended up winning a team silver and an individual bronze, I believe, that year. So
that's amazing.
It showed me this is working. This is doable. And then that team kind of aged out, and this other team had come up that was coming up through the North Carolina team and Georgia team ranks, and they had a lot of experience. They had already competed in 30 or 40 comps. They knew the game. They knew, how to survive beats, how to win. Like, you lose a lot, but when you have the opportunity to win, you need to win. So they knew how to manage that that pace, if you will. And that team went on to be nothing short of dominant for the 4 years they were around.
How do they approach a stream, or how do you talk to them about approaching the stream? And
so that's something I'll get into it. It's interesting. So I'll tell you the basics, and then I'll go back and explain it a little more. So our kind of philosophy is that water, like the best water in the beat, is dependent on insect activity. So for anyone listening, like a beat, you get a section that's 100 or 200 yards long, depending on the density of the fish, and you have to fish in that water. So if you're in ankle deep still water and you don't know how to dry fly fish very well, you're going to have problems. So it's all, it's all random. So sometimes you get great beats, sometimes you don't. So you have to be a versatile guy. We have the luxury as just recreational anglers or guides. If we want to fish a certain way, we just look for that water. In tournaments, you don't get that luxury. So we determined that A, water was dependent on insect activity. So to back up a little bit, I remember everybody saying that, well, I forgot, it was Eddie Pinkston. You remember Eddie?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, so Eddie Pinkston was talking one time about good guy, super intelligent man. But he was talking about how the Czechs had said that if they put a fly in every inch of the water, that they would win. So there's this kind of like typewriter method where you just grid back and forth and just cover it all. Well, I just thought intuitively, like, well, that's not true. If I put my fly in the highest probability water based on the conditions, I'm going to win. All things equal, skill equal. So I said that I don't agree with that. I'm going to figure out a better way. So I started kind of trying to figure out this system, and I'll tell you the story that helped. Might as well. So yeah. I studied the sport, and I started reading a lot of, with the help of Google Translate, a lot of articles from France and the Czech Republic about these competitive teams, because they'd been competing for 20, 25 years, 30 years. We have the luxury of public water. In Europe, they don't. So the only way you can get on some of these streams is to be a part of a club. You get a bunch of dudes together in a club, what happens? Competition starts. That was the earliest kind of forms of FIPS Moosh. So, and you get a bunch of guys that are good on pressured water, and then you get really good anglers. So they were better than us, and we knew it. I knew it. So I read about this guy, John Ostier, who was a coach of the French team, and he was a bit of a tyrant, but he was certainly effective. He won a lot in the 90s and 2000s. And I'd found out through a couple articles that his son had passed away, unfortunately, in I forgot, it was a car wreck or something, but he kind of walked away from the sport. I always said to myself, man, I'd love to be able to talk to a guy like that with 15 years of coaching experience. Like, he's forgotten things that I wish I knew. So I just put his name in the back of my head. I go to Mons, France that first year with the boys, and I see this guy fishing what is ultimately kind of long lining, a very specific style, essentially like floating a cider, essentially is what we'll call it. So I see this older gentleman doing it at this bridge, and I'm like, man, that's a kind of avant-garde thing. That's not, drowning a hare's ear under an indicator. This is pretty advanced stuff. I wonder who that is. So in typical fashion, I just walked down there and I said, hey, my name's Paul. I coach U.S. youth team. Do you speak English? He says, yes, I do. I said, what's your name? He says, Jan Ostier. I said, no way. Tell him who you are. And he said, no, you don't. I said, yes, I do. I told him about all the articles I'd read, so on and so forth. And I said, would you be interested in taking us out tomorrow? So he said, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And I'll tell you what I learned. And it was probably the single biggest thing I ever learned in fly fishing. And it was this. This is the A water's dependent on insect activity. We went to this stream, and there was a bend in the river. And, picture any inside bend. The inside bend is the kind of sexiest, fishiest looking water to any fly fisherman, right? And outside bend is that seam is narrow on the outside, but there certainly is a seam. So he said, if you have 10 casts, where are you going to make them to catch fish? I said, well, I'm going to put 8 casts on the inside and 2 casts on the outside. He said, I'm going to beat you. I said, why? He said, because bugs aren't hatching. I said, okay. I didn't know what he meant. So I made those casts. He said, well, go ahead and fish. And mayflies were coming off. I said, oh, this is mayflies. Funny story. He says, no, the mayflies are flies that hatch in May. This is Danica. It's a type of fly. I said, okay. Well, Danica's hatching. They're basically big white mayflies, about a size 12. So I said, I'm going to throw, a pheasant tail and a 14 and see what happens. Dry dropper. And I do that, and I don't catch many. And we go on up the river, and then we come back, and he says, okay, now what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm going to throw my flies on the outside bend, that narrow seam, because I've learned my lesson from this morning. He said, I'm going to beat you. Well, you should be fishing inside. It was opposite. I said, I don't understand, Jan. Will you explain it to me? And he said, yeah. He said, I want you to picture the water as just a conveyor belt for food. Short of spawning, a fish's only job in life is to eat more than it burns, calorie-wise. So when bugs are hatching, and there's a plethora of bugs, fish will be on the inside bend because it's easier for them to consume the most food there. They can just kind of bounce around and eat and do their thing. He said, but when bugs aren't hatching, the largest probability, or the highest probability area where the most food, or the little bit of food that's available is on that outside bend. So those fish will shift over the outside bend to get whatever pickings they can get. He said, so in France, we prioritize our water based on insect activity. Mm-hmm. It also applies to pocket water. So when bugs are hatching, so I'll ask this question. I've asked this before. You ever go through a section of pocket water with nymphing or dry drop or whatever, it doesn't matter, and you catch them? Of course, we all have.
Yeah.
You ever go through the section of pocket water and you don't catch them at all, and you're like, man, where are they at?
Sure.
Of course, we all. What Jan said was, when bugs are hatching, they'll be in those pockets really well because it's an easy place for them to get food. When bugs are not hatching or there's no insect activity, they'll be back in kind of, I can't describe it, but some of those troughs and other places where the highest probability of the little bit of food coming down is at. That's where you'll find those fish kind of condensed. And they do that really quickly, faster than people realize. So I took that principle and we started applying it to our local rivers and places we knew well. And I would always teach them how to nymph shallow, medium, and deep, like in the column. And a fish that is up shallow fighting the current, obviously, and feeding is actively feeding. Mm-hmm. So if you're fishing deep and you're catching fish and all of a sudden fish start coming medium and shallow, you know that something's happening, like a hatch. Doesn't matter what it is, like that's for you to determine. It's situational. But we start to shift our focus on how much time we're spending on certain water types based on the insect activity. And that was really that. And then focusing on the team metal mentality was the fact that we were able to, I mean, I say it modestly, but dominate the world scene for quite some time. And most anglers want to focus on what fly it is. I'm guilty of that.
Sure.
The flies don't matter. You know, I never told my guys what leader they had to fish. That was up to them. As long as it was effective, I was happy. Because again, going back to Stevens, you can't fish another man's game. Mm-hmm. As long as they turn over, I was cool with it. I didn't particularly care. You know, trout have the brain the size of a Fruit Loop and a single digit. They're not particularly smart, but they're extremely conditioned. So as long as it was size, shape, and color in that order, I think it was fine. We fished a lot of, you know, some of the famous flies came from our tournaments, you know, the mop flies from here and the France fly. And, mm-hmm. you know, the French we obviously took from the French, but mm-hmm. essentially they're all pheasant tails and hare's ears. So we didn't overthink our fly selection too much. We just made sure that we spent our time in the highest probability water. And the kind of much smaller portion of that was we would determine our pace, like how quickly we covered water based on fish density. So, you know, the less fish there are, you know, that's kind of determines your pace. And if there's a lot of fish, you do other things. But, you know, those basic principles we would apply in practice, tournaments in North Carolina, Colorado, and then ultimately France, Italy, Ireland, Poland, United States, you name it. And what you find is it works everywhere, you know?
Yeah.
Fish do the same thing for the same reasons. Now, there's nuances with a grayling or a brown trout. There's certainly nuances in still water fishing with how those fish feed. But once you learn what those are, like you have the fundamentals, you have not unlike any sport, the basics. Joe Humphrey said this, you know, a mentor of mine and certainly one of the best to do it, but he was a career wrestling coach. And he told his wrestlers, when this applies to fishing, that the basics, practice to perfection, make champions. Nice. And nothing we did, people would watch us and it doesn't look different. But if you really watch, we were certainly doing things differently. Like we fished very light, we fished upstream, we fished, you know, certain ways, A-water dependent on insect activity, and they would be really hung up on what flies we were fishing. Mm-hmm. And what I've learned over the years, and you know this, like you take 10 guys and you open their fly box and what's in there? It's the same stuff.
Yeah.
Honest, you know that. You've been around a long time. So it's the same flies. Like it's a pheasant tail with a copper bead. I mean, it's... Yeah.
That's some excellent information. Thanks for that, man. That was awesome. Appreciate that. And that's going to be huge for a lot of the listeners to hear. Did you find that, like in some countries or even some rivers, that you would find that certain colors were working, or when the water was murky, did you guys switch to purples or whatever? What did you guys find in that kind of a situation?
Yeah, so I think it's I would start with what's in the area. So one thing we did, and it sounds kind of rudimentary, but it works, is everybody looks at, everyone knows how to like pump a trout or flip over a rock or whatever. But I just look at, the rocks. I'd look at spider webs in the morning. Like spiders are really good at catching bugs. They have to. So I'd look around, and if you see a bunch of like diptera, midges or whatever, like, okay, there's midges around. You see betas, like you start to get an idea, like, okay, betas, size 18. Yeah, blue wings, 18. Like I can throw a zebra midge or a size 18 Frenchie. And if there was stoneflies around, like that was the kind of killer for us, specifically with dirty water, was this was right when the squirmy wormy was coming up, and even pre-squirmy wormy. But, you look at the size, like if there's big Brachiocentrus, or certainly the big stoneflies like the Pteronarcis or whatever, if there's big stoneflies present, or sculpins, like size, shape, and color. So you could, a number of things. It doesn't take long if you know exactly where the fish are at. Like if you got a stretch of water that definitely has the fish, you can cycle through the flies, and it could be jigging a slump buster, it could be drowning a squirmy wormy or a mop, it could be, a turd. I'm sure you remember that fly, but patch rubber leg. Yeah. Something dark, size, shape, and color. A lot of times you could dial in on what it was. Like me personally, if the water's high and off color, I'm looking for an obvious current seam that's going to stack trout. Even if it's a community hole, it's still going to be there. Yeah. And then I'm going to drift through. My go-to is going to be a mop. It's going to be we call them turds, but patch rubber leg. It's going to be a squirmy. And then color-wise, generally dark. Like we didn't, especially in off-color water. Clear water, we'd mess with some hot spots, but I would go with a size 10 patch rubber leg with a 4mm bead, and I would drift it through a few times, and if it didn't work, I'd start jigging it through, and then
awesome.
At that point, you got to just grind them out. When I could give you examples. We'll save some of those, but had plenty of tournaments where water blew out and things got weird. And the other thing too, I would go to a single fly. So, those fish it's not about how often you get drifts in there. It's about getting good drifts in there. So I would fish a single fly, whatever it may be. I think George Daniel, he may correct me, but I'm pretty sure he won or had a great session in Pennsylvania during that flood that you guys were there. Yeah. Jigging a buster behind a rock.
I remember that.
Your life, but he knew they'd be there. It was was it the best water on the river? Certainly not, but it was the best water he had, his beat. Yeah. So George is fierce and dangerous as hell. Like he can beat you anywhere and does regularly. Sure. But he jigged a slump buster behind that rock because that's what he had, and he made it happen. So
I was the next beat down from him.
It was a lot of water flowing through the.
Oh my God! It was raging through there, man. You had to find like a little tiny eddy to, it was tough. That whole competition was pretty tough.
Brutal.
Yeah.
Brutal.
So let's talk about your casting and being a MCI and all that. So you became what's that?
I said, okay, we can do that. So I'll try to, I know my stories go long, but I'll abbreviate them.
No worries. They're great, man. Love it. Learning a lot, man.
The first guy that got me into tournament fishing was a guy named Gordon Vanderpool. He's a local guide. One of the best anglers I know, period. Like he's tremendous. And he said, hey, you should, we had this tournament called the Rumble in the Rhododendron, and it paid something like $10,000 to win. You got to remember, like, I grew up on welfare. Like, I certainly know what no money is. So I was like, $10,000 is a lot.
Sure.
And I want to win that thing. So there was a casting competition, and you had to cast, like, it was a bunch of accuracy targets and then distance, which they would times by 3 and add that to your total score. And that first year, I remember like Rick Hartman and Eugene Schuler just blew everybody away. And those guys are really good, obviously. So I said, well, if I can't make the casting competition, I can never get through to the tournament to win. So that was my goal, was figure out how to cast. And Gordon took me out, and he wasn't a CI or anything yet. He just is a great caster, and said, I'll teach you. So we set the targets out 25, 35, 55 feet. There was a roll cast thing and a distance thing. And I couldn't even hit the 25-foot target. I had no concept of what a loop was. I didn't need it because I fished small streams, and you could just kind of flop out whatever out there and make it happen.
Yeah.
So he started kind of working with me and teaching me kind of the basics. And I started putting these kind of tenets in my head. I didn't know it at the time, but they were Federation-based things that he had read, like stop your rod tip high. That's an Al Kite thing, right? Or, the 5 essentials, and being obviously the Gamble brothers. And I didn't know it, but I was starting to learn the basics of what was the Federation's core principles in casting and how to throw a tight loop. So I'm not being dramatic. Gordon will vouch for me. I could not hit a 25-foot target bullseye. And I started practicing. I said, well, there's no way I'm going to beat these guys unless I practice. So I started casting every day. And like anything, I obsessed over it. I was policing full time. So I would listen to podcasts from, Al Burr and the Ray Jeffs and anybody I could, anybody and everything I could. And started on my days off, and every day after work, I'd practice casting. Started watching videos, and I probably consumed a lifetime's worth of knowledge in 6 months or a year. And then I met a guy named Mac Brown, who I'd known already. He was on the team, on the North Carolina team, and everyone knew he'd written Casting Angles, which is a tremendous book on the sport, and was certainly the brightest, probably, I would say arguably one of the smartest guys I know, and certainly the smartest as far as casting goes. I called him as well and said, hey, here's what I want to do. And he was wonderful and gave me all the attention I needed and gave me a lot of homework. And I just started casting and started getting a lot of interest in like two-handed stuff. And because, to and fro casting, which is fine, back and forth, single plane casting is great, unless you live in the Smoky Mountains where there's rhododendron everywhere you go, and that doesn't fly for long. So I started learning some of these things, and I started getting into Skagit. I read Eddie Ward, and I read all these things I could, just immersing myself in casting. So I go back the next year for the Rumble and the Rhododendron and actually win the cast tournament.
No way. I
did. Yeah, great story. But I mean, I put the time, and I got to pick the first beat. I think we won that tournament. I can't remember exactly. We won it a couple times, and lost it a couple times, and one of the prizes was a Sage Z-axis. And for the first time in my life, I had a tool that, to me, I still have the rod. It means a lot to me. But this thing was like the keys to the kingdom, to quote Joe Humphrey.
Awesome.
The highest quality tool that you could it was a 9'5" weight.
Yeah.
You could have. And then Matt said, hey, are you interested in this casting instructor thing? I said, well, what is it? I don't know. I don't teach. I mean, I guide and I teach people how to cast. But he said, he's like, it's not a badge of honor. It's a methodology to teach people how to cast, and you can speak the same language that I do. Like, do you know about slack, acceleration, power, pause, tip, path, whatever it may be, transverse waves and loop propagation and all this stuff. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, well, if you go through this, you'll be able to speak the same language as me. I said, I'm in. You had me at hello. Let's go. And I started working on it. And I went and took my CI, and I took it with Eric Cook and Tom Rupening and a couple Southeastern guys that are tremendous casters. And I passed it. So then they knew I was kind of underneath Mac's tutelage at this point. Mac is pretty legendary. So, I felt a lot of pressure to not let Mac down, to be the best I could be, and to really, be a good caster, but also an instructor, most importantly. And I did it. So then Mac said, there's this thing called the Master Casting Instructor. It's really hard. They can ask you any sort of number of questions. Nothing's off limits. The test is infinitely harder than the CI test. It's changed recently, but it's hard. Yeah. So I started studying for that, and about a year later, I took it with David Diaz, who's passed recently, a tremendous guy, Eric Cook, who's an engineer, and a bunch of these guys, and ended up passing. But that year of my life, I spent now, I mean, really obsessing, like doubling down, reading all I could, really getting into the nitty gritty of what is this thing? Like, how does a rod bend? What exactly is a loop? What's happening in the loop face? Like, I mean, we got into the weeds big time, and I ate it up. You know, I consumed all the knowledge I could, and went in there. Everyone said, like, most people are going to fail it, so I was fully prepared to fail. Like, I was a competitive angler. I knew how to lose. I lost a lot, more often than I won. And I said, all right, yeah, I'm ready. I'm going to go take it, and passed it.
That's incredible, man.
Yeah, I started doing some of the testing with, you know, the guys around here, and I don't stay as busy as I used to be honest with you, but I love it. Like, I love casting. To this day, I still study it. I still love the things I learned, like 6-step methods and Bruce Richards and all these things. Like, these guys are pioneers, and it works. And now I'm able to, you know, we don't know each other, never met each other, but you and I I'm confident could sit with a group of 10 students, and you and I could and instantly speak the same language and help them based on their ability level because of, you know, the Federation's kind of foundation.
What, okay, here's a great question to people that are aspiring to be casting instructors. What advice would you give them?
I would tell them that first is, if you're looking to it as a badge of honor, you're looking at it from the wrong place. And I would tell you, don't do it, because this may be unpopular, but I'll just say it because I don't care.
Yeah.
Becoming a guide in the state of North Carolina just means that you pay $10 on top of your fishing license.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean you're a guide, in my opinion. Certainly doesn't mean you're a good angler. And we all know, we don't have to name names, we all know people that are guides that are not good fishermen or good anglers. And for me, I took it personally. Like, I wanted to be the best I could be. I wanted to know that the knowledge I was sharing, like the place I came from in guiding, other than to make money, but honestly, in my heart, what I wanted to do was to make sure that you didn't need me. I wanted to bring all the knowledge that you were capable of absorbing in a half day or a full day. And I would take you out as much as you wanted to, but I wanted you to not need me. I wanted you to be able to go look and say, okay, fish her up, dry dropper, boom, boom, boom. Here's what I'm going to do by yourself, and you go out and catch them. That was success to me. So to me, the casting instructor, the CI, which I encourage everyone to do, but it is a teaching qualification. It gives you an ability and a knowledge base and a curriculum to be able to teach somebody to diagnose and correct casting faults. Because the most frustrating thing to any new fly fisherman, myself included, was I see the fish and I can't reach them. Mm-hmm. What separates the very best from the not so good is line control. It's not fly selection. You can read 1 million articles about the best flies. They're all pheasant tails and hare's ears. What separates people is the ability to get a drag-free drift in front of a fish. And there's a lot of crap instruction out there with people that don't know what they're talking about. So if you want a badge of honor, that it's not for you. But if you want to have a bulletproof method to make someone the cause and correction of casting faults and make them better anglers, and to be able to speak the same language as a group of thousands of other people, then you should absolutely take it. And it'll make you better. Like, I'm able now, like today as we speak, I don't cast like I used to. I'm doing a lot of bass fishing and stuff, but I still use those things. Like, if I have a tailing tendency or if I'm not casting great, I'm going through the Bruce Richards 6-step. I'm going through the things I learned to fix myself, and it works. It's always worked. That's why it's, the program that it is. So that would be my advice, is really look at what place you're trying to get to. If you're just trying to put a feather in your cap, maybe save your time. If you're looking to really be able to have a solid foundation to understand the cause and correction of common casting problems, then you should have been started on it a month ago.
I love your explanation and determination of, immersing yourself in casting, which a lot of people don't realize. To become a casting instructor, master casting instructor, you got to know everything and really immerse yourself into hours and hours of reading and teaching and casting. And so my question is, how many hours do you think it takes for a person to get their CI?
Their CI, I would say it depends on their ability. So let me answer it shortly. I don't know, 1,000.
Yeah. I was going to say the same thing.
I'd say 1,000, but again, it depends on how people learn. So some people, like, I grew up, I was a nerd. I'm a big guy, but I like video games. I play guitar. I have hand-eye coordination. Like, I like throwing darts and hitting golf balls and pitching baseball, catching footballs. So I had some hand-eye coordination, but some people are auditory learners. Like, they have to hear it. Some people are kinesthetic. They need to, let me hold your hand, like, to and fro, like, all that type of stuff. Everyone learns differently. So it depends on the person. The test is a very, very attainable test. The skills are very basic. I know it's changed a little, and I'm familiar with the test now, but the old test was, changing rod plane, like throwing a tight loop, like explain the cause and correction of tailings loops. But the kind of hard part, and this is what I guess I failed on the most, because I'm a nerd and I want to talk about transverse waves and stupid stuff. But they would say, a good instructor can explain things simply. So I really prided myself on not getting into the weeds and being able to take a group of people, which I did a lot, teach them a roll caster, pick up and lay down, and fix the tailing loop. Like, I used to think to myself, how can I answer this in as few sentences as possible, or maybe one sentence? How do I make this very simple? Because a person trying to just add a little distance on their cast doesn't care about, the frequency of counterflex. Like, that doesn't matter. They just want to know the basics. Stop your rod tip high. Like, what is acceleration? Maybe it's pause. And I would ask people, are you a musician? If you play music, pause is simply timing. If you have no musical ability, then I have to explain pause differently. But, this, but a common thing is, too short of a stroke or too short of a pause, which leads to creep. Very fixable problem, super simple to fix. So I would try to make those things really simple. And what I would do is show them what they were doing, explain what they were looking for, show them what creep was with me, so I could explain it and they could see it and they could watch. So I'm covering all the learning styles, and then explain to them how to fix it. And most of the time they would sort it out and they could fix it right away. But I think, all in all, depending on the person, I'd say 1,000 hours you could get there.
So you said that it took you about 6 months until you took the test for the MCI. So how many hours do you think that you put in to get your MCI?
I think it was actually a year. So if I recall correctly, I thought I was ready in 6 months.
Oh, copy that.
But Mac and I'll speak for myself. I won't speak for Mac, but I thought that if I took it too early, that they might not think I was ready. And I don't think what people didn't realize about me was, like, probably some undiagnosed ADD. But if I hyper focus on something, I consume the lifetimes of knowledge and put it in my memory banks in 6 months.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, let me wait a year, because I thought they would gig me if I took it in 6 months. So I actually waited right at about a year, and I went to the next, I can't remember where it was, one of the conclaves, actually it was here, I believe, and took my MCI test. So it was about a year.
Wow. That's incredible, man. That really is.
And I didn't know it, but I was actually learning MCI stuff during my CI. So Mac, who was kind of my tutor through all of it, wouldn't let me rest on the basics. Like, he wouldn't let me rest on just, like, positive curve or whatever it is. He was actually teaching me master level stuff and sending me down the road of master level stuff as a CI. I didn't really know that because I hadn't looked at the MCI. I was really task oriented. I'd looked at it kind of, but I was really kind of focused on the CI. I knew the questions. I really understood, or I thought I did, and still think I mostly do, like, why those things happen. Like the cause and correction of tailing loops, when they happen, how to see, like, in the cast where they happen and how they, kind of propagate in a loop. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was already kind of beyond the CI level when I took the CI. Once I took the CI and passed it, then I was like, all right, I'm going to look into this MCI. And it is it's not twice as hard as the CI. Like, it's 10 times as hard. Not so much the task. Like, we can all throw, we can throw the, whatever, the men's at different places, but that's not, the tasks aren't the hard part. The hard part is anything is open for discussion. And how do you prepare for that? Like, you have to be a student, but you have to be ready for, and it's also kind of individualistic to the examiner. Like, I had David Diaz, who was a casting board of governor and had a tremendous amount of knowledge. I had Eric Cook, who was I didn't know who I was going to get, for the record, but I had Eric Cook, who was an engineer. So he's going to talk to you about forces, mass acceleration.
Yeah, he is.
That 1/2 mass velocity squared. So you have to be really, like, you can't half-ass it. You have to be, which, as it should be, you have to be pretty dialed in to be able to pass the test. And as I learned, as I went on to administer other tests, both CIs and MCIs, I learned really quickly that, you can fake it for about half the test, but towards the end, like, deficiencies are glaring, and they will pounce on you, and you will not pass.
Oh, that's all good stuff, man. Love it. So let's talk about Drift Media. Is that your company?
Sure. It is.
What is Drift Media?
So Drift Media started, I was policing full-time, guiding, and I started shooting photos and videos, doing some fly fishing film tour stuff. The first thing I ever filmed was the 2011 National Championships in Cherokee. I just wanted to document fishing. Like, it's so important to me. It's all I thought about. I was like, man, maybe, I don't know. I mean, teach myself how to shoot photos and videos. At that point, you could watch YouTube until you passed out every night. There's plenty of things to watch. You just had to go practice, figure it out. So I started shooting videos and photos, and I was always into marketing and branding. And just started kind of like anything, just hyper focusing on what makes a good brand and what are success. More importantly, what is failures? Like, what can we learn from things that didn't go well? And there was millions of articles and pieces of content out there where people talked about it openly. So to me, I saw it as, that guy when I was 17 with the tan elk hair caddis in the Tuckasegee River that told me to take a hike. Like, that's fine. But now I have millions of articles where they're telling me the exact answer, and they're discussing what went right, what went wrong from marketing standpoints or creatively. So I started reading it, and not unlike fishing, you can't fish another man's game. I started shooting stuff in my own style, like videos and photos. And then pretty quickly, it felt like ages, but over a couple years, I started filming fly fishing film tour stuff, and that started going well. Then people started calling saying, hey, I want to talk about my brand and my look and my image and some marketing things. So I started doing all that. And then, a couple years into it, I was able to start, I started working for some really big brands, some really big startups that became famous brands in the industry, and, kind of trial and error stuff. We didn't always get it right. I certainly didn't. I'm 38 now. Like, I made a lot of mistakes, but I learned from them all and started kind of building my own style. And got a good reputation in the industry, like hunting, fishing, shooting, that type of stuff I was into, and started getting calls. People always wanted media and marketing's tough, and the economy changes how much people need that service. And I looked at myself like the easy button. I could come in and a la carte as little or as much as you wanted. And we started doing a lot of cool work. And up until, going to work full time for Black Rifle, that's what I did day in and day out, was telling those brand stories and shooting the imagery to support it.
What films did you guys do for the
film
tour?
I shot, let's see here, I shot Dubai on the fly.
Oh, you did?
Brand.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I did African tigerfish thing with Yaka.
Yeah, I saw that. That's cool.
Most recently I shot Das Boat for Meat Eater, the boat series.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I'm trying to think. Gosh, we did a bunch of them.
Yeah, that's cool, man.
Striper stuff. It just would, like, I was, again, I'm a camera guy, so I did a lot of stuff. Like, anybody that would pay me, I did it. But we did a lot of work in hunting as well. We did some TV show stuff. We did fin chasers. We did some hunting shows. We did a number of things. I landed some, some bigger clients throughout the years that kind of helped me take a breath. Like, it's a hard world. You're getting paid a day rate. So you do them. I mean, anyone can do the math. You get 400, 500, 600, 700 a day, which sounds great, but you have off days, you have travel days, you have expenses. So to make any sort of real money, which is what I needed to do to leave law enforcement full time, you got to put yourself on the road 130 days a year. So the way I looked at it was, if I put my brain into 130 days a year of anything, I can get good at it. I had, for the first time in my life, I had confidence in myself, but I also knew how quickly it went away. So I always worked like somebody was trying to take it from me. Just went above and beyond and just tried to be as authentic as I could, because I always felt like that was kind of our motto. Authenticity is a powerful qualifier. So when I never even told people that I worked with all the big fly brands, but some of them knew me, but they never could quite figure out why the things worked as well as they did until they asked the question. And they realized, like, I competed and I guided and it was an MCI, and they said, God, you should have said something. I was hoping it would translate in my work.
Yeah, I mean, that's coming from your eye as an angler, man, can make all that stuff look killer, because a lot of people don't have that, just the angles of the water and the casting and all that, I'm sure plays a big role in how all your stuff looks.
Yeah, and I got connected through fly fishing and fishing with my mentors. Like, I grew up watching Flip Pallet and Walker's Cay Chronicles and Larry Dahlberg and Hunt for Big Fish. And through fishing, I look back now as I get a little bit older, and those are the things I look back on that were the funnest times of my life. Like, Larry's a mentor of mine and one of my favorite people in the world, and getting to hang and meet No Flip, and the time I spent with Blaine Chocolate, way, way back in the day. We're still great friends to this day. And like, all these guys that I still look up to, like, they're the kind of pioneers of all this stuff. And although I don't fly fish competitively anymore, and I certainly don't, I used to just only fly fish. Now I do a lot of different things, which is, Larry encouraged me to do, but I still keep up with all these guys. They're still the brightest minds and the people that inspire me the most. I didn't look up to, I didn't care too much about Michael Jordan growing up. I knew who he was, but I looked at Zell Rowland and Bassmaster Classic, and
right.
Larry Dahlberg and
Awesome.
Flip Pat, Jose Wajete, and these were the guys that I was just like, man, these are my Michael Jordans.
So what makes a good brand?
Oh man, so keep it simple.
Yeah.
First, let's define what is a brand. Brand is what people say about you when you aren't in the room. And if they're saying what they're saying about you is accurate, like if they say whatever your brand may be, like, if that's accurate, then you're doing a good job. So if it's not, then you have to adjust that. So what makes a good brand is when you have a well built out customer journey. So that kind of consideration, awareness, familiarity, purchase. You have the ability for someone to associate with your brand and then purchase your product. And that's all well thought out. And you have a unique selling point or value proposition that's dialed in. And you remain authentic and you provide value, whether that be content or in some cases it could be, whatever, support for, humanitarian causes. Everything's different. But when all those things align, it's the clearest picture you'll ever see. There's no work to do. It's just maintenance. Now, that's often difficult because people ruin brands. Brands don't ruin brands. People ruin brands. So they have all these other visions, and oftentimes it's not even people, it's egos. That's what I see the most is, ego is the downfall of most brands. And at the end of the day, you have to look at, am I providing, value, that unique selling point or that value proposition to my customer? Am I authentic? Am I solving, is my mission set correct? And, you look at, when you walk into the offices at Red Bull, it says a mission to fascinate. Like, they're very clear of what their job is. And people, they don't know why they're there sometimes. And, there was a line one time in a movie, that Johnny Cash movie, and he's singing some gospel song, and the producer says, you know, if this is your last day on earth, if you're dying in a ditch, like, is that the song you're going to sing me? Some kind of tired old gospel song that we've heard a million times. And he busts into Folsom Prison Blues. So in that movie, Folsom Prison Blues, that's his unique selling point. That's his value proposition. And some people call it the elevator pitch. I think that's a little kind of too broad strokes, but, you know, kind of put simply, there's a lot of noise in the world. Why should we give a crap about you?
Mm-hmm.
There's ways we could dive into that for hours, but, you know, if you've got a unique selling point, if you've got something actually tangible, there's only a couple ways to get it right and a million ways to get it wrong. So don't get me wrong. There's also bad ideas. Like if you want to sell, you know, hot and ready pizza to your door in 45 minutes or it's free and call it Domino's 2, like you're not going to do really well because there's already a business model for that. But if you're actually providing something unique and you, to quote Joe Humphreys, if you execute the basics exceptionally, you win.
Love it.
And a lot of people are unclear about what the basics are. You know, they get into those positions, and I don't want to name names, but really big companies, you get people in there and it happens at, you know, where I'm at now. People want to be close to what they feel is like the fame or the stardom. At the end of the day, I kind of treat it like competition. Like you're only as good as your last tournament. And people will kind of crap on competitive fly fishing as this or that, or competitive angling in general. But you know what happens in competitive any fishing is you lose a lot. Egos don't last long. So nobody in the history of ever, like Kevin Van Dam's probably the best competitive angler to ever do it. He still lost. He only won less than 1% of the time, 0.5%. So, you know, ego is the most dangerous thing on the planet, and confidence, fine. Confidence is great.
Yeah.
But ego is super dangerous, and it's something I try to combat every day, certainly at work and in tournaments and all that stuff. People see it's easy to, you know, talk for an hour and talk about world championships and all this stuff, but they don't see, like, to stay at the highest level at anything, something will be sacrificed. It could be personal time, it could be friends, could be family. You know, I've certainly lost all of those. So there's a balance of, do you want to be the best or do you just want to be a participant? And you have to be clear with yourself about that. Like if you just want to, if you're 20 years old and you just like the idea of the guiding lifestyle, you just want to make a little extra money, move to the mountains, you know, go to some college in the mountains, pick a place, make a little extra money and be around that community, that's fine. Or do you want to be the best? But know what it is. And damn sure don't spend your time taking food off the table of people trying to be the best. Like, be honest with yourself and know your place. I always was. That's why I had people at the time say, oh, you should do more podcasts. You should be in this book. You should do these things. I never did it because I was a niche guy. Like I didn't try to be the best guide on the planet. I just happened to have a skill set that I wanted to use to feed my family because I needed the extra money. So I would always push people towards Gordon, you know, my mentor. Like he's guiding for a living, right? I never tried to make a living in fly fishing. I just tried to be the best competitor and angler I could be. I tried to make sure that if somebody asked me a question, I could give them the best answer I could. So I never made it feel like the guy made me feel with the caddis when I was 17. So I would say be honest with yourself and know your place. Like I get frustrated, and I'll speak for myself, and you don't have to comment on it, but you know, a lot of these young guys that come in and they want to, and I want them to be excited. Fly fishing's awesome. Fishing is awesome. But don't skip the middle part. Like don't try to, like, how do I say that without sounding like a dick? Like, you know, and like don't try to get to the cool guys table and miss all the stuff that's the most important, which is the fight to get the knowledge, to be better, the reps it takes, the days of not catching, the days of sucking. Like that's what matters the most. Not, you know, there's so many guys that look the part and can talk the talk, and they will talk down to competition or this and that. But the truth of the matter is they couldn't catch a fish at SeaWorld. So, like, don't skip the beginning to try to get to the end. Because the older I get, it's the beginning that matters. The beginning being, like, the struggle. And while you're thinking about how do I get to the next party to be around influencers, the guys that inspire me, the Gordons, guys like you that have spent your life in fishing, those guys are still thinking about how can I provide a better service to my clients? How can my shop be better? What can I do? Like, those are the guys that inspire me. So that's why I never tried to go present, this knowledge and all this stuff, because I was like, I don't want to take away from the people that are truly making a living at it. So I would share it for free, of course, but it was always individualized. If that makes sense. Totally.
I love it, man. This is a great podcast. Thank you so much, man, for doing this. I got one last subject I want to talk to you about. That is Black Riffle Coffee, man. Tell me about that and what you do there and what Black Riffle Coffee is all about.
Sure. So I currently am the director of strategic partnerships at Black Riffle and influencers. I'm proud of that. It's a big book of business. It's a big company. And when I started there, which was 4 years ago, we had 50 some employees. Now we have like 850. We've gone public. Oh my God,
that's crazy.
The revenue growing tremendously, but there's a lesson. So I'm extremely proud of the brand. I've worked my ass off here. I will continue to do it. I love everyone I work with and the brand and what it is. Certainly not easy, but I think probably learning, like I don't look for easy necessarily. Mm-hmm. But I started at Black Riffle. They were a growing brand. They had the same values as I carried a gun for a living, still work part-time. So I've been doing that 14 years. A lot of these guys were military and law enforcement, first responders. So we spoke the same language. It's kind of big boy rules where to explain, it's like you're only judged basically on your ability to execute. Like nobody cares if, nobody cares really. Like they don't white, black, yellow, blue. That doesn't matter. You're just based like mission effectiveness. And I like that. That's cool for me. I grew up in that environment, certainly. So I came in to be the fishing and hunting guy. They needed help back in the day. They were just starting to grow quickly, and they needed somebody authentic that could help with the outdoors and help kind of steer them on some of the content and the partnerships. Because if you get in bed with the wrong partners early as a growing brand, it's not irrecoverable, but it's very expensive and it's dangerous. So I took that seriously, and I started working for them as a subcontractor with Drift Media. And then over time, I built some programs and made mistakes and made some wins and ultimately kind of rose the food chain to where I was solving enough high-level problems where they offered me a job full-time about a year ago. And I took it. Deep down is what I always wanted to do. I was around a lot of, I'd seen hundreds of millions of dollars in growth with brands I'd been with, but I never felt like I was at home. I felt like I was doing a job that ultimately I would be replaced at. And that's kind of the this crappy part about being a subcontractor in marketing. The better job you do, all you do is work yourself out of the job. So if I come to your fly shop and you're having marketing problems, in a year, if you and I have found a tremendous guy to run the shop that's smart and intelligent, forward thinking, well, I'm out, but you are winning. And that's the whole point. I always had that perspective. So I always knew I was working myself out of a job with all these clients. I was learning so much and getting, my shot groups were getting better and better with the things I was executing. And when I got to Black Riffle, I just felt like I was home. And I said, this is going to be really hard. And I knew that there was going to be problems, but I was confident that I could solve them and that I would work towards them. I was a worker. I wanted to go do it. And, I wanted to get in my truck and go execute. And I had a clear vision. A couple years ago, I saw the kind of the future and this clear vision with Black Riffle. I knew problems were going to come up, and they do every day. It's a big company. But just like anything else, I was confident I had the tools to solve those problems. Just like I'm confident, fixing a guy's tailing loop or teaching him how to cast. I have the tools. I don't know what he looks like. I don't know what his ability is, but I'm confident I can walk up there sight unseen and help him. Mm-hmm. Same thing with Black Riffle. So when they offered me a full-time job, I took it. I jumped at it and said, yeah, I'll take it. And, I'm really proud of the things we've done. I mean, we've grown. The numbers are public, and the revenue doesn't matter. You can look it up, but it's tremendous what we've been able to do in the last. Yeah. The company really started in 2014, but it's been a fun ride. Hope to stay here as long as they'll have me.
I think I learned about Black Riffle Coffee through Waypoint TV. and
Sure.
Tom Rowland, I think that was my first time seeing it, and then I just keep seeing it more and more, so whatever you guys are doing is awesome.
Well, the basics of anyone listening that, everyone talks about Black Rifle or Yeti or whatever it is, right? And
Yeah.
at the end of the day, to quote Joe Humphreys, I guess in closing, the basics executed to perfection. What are the basics? Two things. Authenticity is a powerful qualifier. Apologize for nothing. Be who you are. Right? I'm a fishing nerd. That's all I think about.
I love it.
I'm obsessed with it.
Yeah.
And then 2, frequency and reach. So if you can get frequency and reach and you remain authentic, that's the basic executed to perfection.
My podcast, has grown from, I do a little bit of everything, all kinds of musicians to fishermen to whatever, comedians, whatever. And your story is really cool. And I love how you're so motivated to get better at everything. And one of the things that I talk about in my podcast and with all these other folks that are on my podcast is, believing, the passion and striving to get to that point. And with your story, you have all the stories of, fly fishing to drift media to the youth fly fishing team to everything that you do. You're so passionate about and you immerse yourself into it. And it's really cool, man, really inspiring. So I want to thank you, Paul, man, for being on my podcast. This was amazing podcast. I learned a lot and hope to talk to you again sometime soon, man.
Yeah, I appreciate you. I've listened to a long time and you do a great job. So
man,
anything out, and hopefully, man, one day we'll get to whatever it may be, fly fish, bass fish, marlin, whatever it is.
Exactly.
Something.
We didn't even talk about bass fishing. I'm a bass geek, man.
For another day.
Yeah, for sure.
They're just like trout. They do the same things for the same reasons. So we'll
yeah. Well, what a pleasure, Paul. Thank you so much, bud.
Yeah, I appreciate you. Holler if you need anything.
Okay, bud. Thank you, man. Bye-bye.
It's a Guy Jeans podcast.